All right, Roger. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, in 1984, a low budget independent production completely took the box office by surprise, and the title was The Terminator.
Oh, this film, Pascal. I actually don't know where to start talking about this film. I mean, it's got time travel in it, and you know how much I like my time travel. We've talked about Back to the Future before. I love those grandfather paradoxes, and this is the grandfather of all grandfather paradoxes, isn't it? The going back in time to kill somebody in order to change the future, effectively. But yeah, looking back, it was a low budget film, which actually looks incredibly high budget even now. I think you watch this film and think this is absolutely spot on with its special effects despite its age, and incredibly fast paced. You know, I think that once it gets going, there's maybe one scene where Sarah Connor and the guy from the future sit down in a motel room and have a chat, and something else happens as well. But that's about the only part of the film where there's any respite from the relentless onslaught of Arnold Schwarzenegger's android. So yeah, this has got so many memories for me, and it's one of the best films I've ever seen.
I mean, to this day, you know, we'll talk about the sequels as well, and the role they may have played to actually make the first one shine even more. But it's just a fascinating story of content creators coming together and using true guerrilla-style filmmaking and ingenuity, to use that word again, whereby, again, not enough time, not enough money, not enough, you know, all the other, but still had a story they wanted to tell. So where do we begin? Well, goodness, I mean, I think what has worked is the fact that you had two people that really were driving the vision. You had Gail Ann Hurd, the producer, and James Cameron, the director and writer. Now, both Gail Ann Hurd and James Cameron had worked together for Roger Corman. For big film fans out there, Roger Corman would be known to you as, you know, this guy was a complete genius at creating movies, sometimes with little to no resources. And they were working with him. And I think they learned some very, very kind of, I think, important skills and ways in which you can get value on screen. I think, you know, as I mentioned just before we move on to film marketing, the music and soundtrack create an identity to the film that is like no other. So Brad Fiedel, who, you know, I mean, as soon as you hear the pum 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 bum 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 bum, and you know that it's beginning, you know, with that kind of almost cyberpunk, but before people knew the term cyberpunk. In fact, if you remember, James and Gail Ann Hurd coined the term tech noir, which was used as the name for the nightclub where Sarah Connor is hoping to escape, you know, and be rescued by the police. But what was interesting is, again, the history behind the movie where, you know, there was a bit back and forth with regard to the casting. So you may have watched the documentaries like all of us, but you may remember that Lance Henriksen was actually the first choice for the Terminator. The first idea was somebody that was not like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was meant to be the hero. He was meant to play Kyle Reese.
Ah.
When Arnold Schwarzenegger received the script, he wanted to play the Terminator. His agent was actually nervous, saying, well, nah, maybe if you're the hero, that'd be better, because if you're the bad guy, your career is just beginning with Conan the Barbarian and so on, perhaps let's not go there. And interestingly, James Cameron didn't want Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Kyle Reese at all. So they had this kind of strange meeting where none of them wanted the other to do the role. And they were both in agreement. And to this day, they still laugh about this awkward lunch there where James Cameron was looking for a way to tell Arnold Schwarzenegger, you can't be Kyle Reese. And Arnold was trying to think of a way to say, I don't want to be Kyle Reese, you know, so very, very amusing. But the one thing that James took away from his time at, you know, with Roger Corman, and I think himself, because he was such a creative guy, he spent enormous amount of time storyboarding and sketching to capture the vision and to be able to communicate it well with the production team. And I wonder whether that's the number one lesson as well for all of us content marketers. Do we need to spend more time sketching and storyboarding than being on mobile phones and laptops?
I think it's a good call, that, isn't it? I'm sure I saw once that somebody was able to build a house within about an hour, an entire house. And in the program, they said, it isn't the fact that we did it in an hour, it's that everything was set out, planned and choreographed beforehand, and they spent weeks doing that. So literally it was just bang, it all went up together. And this is a great example of that. They spent the time painstakingly mapping it out, and that's probably why this film is just so relentless. Like I said before, pretty much as soon as the film starts, you almost find yourself holding your breath for the entire 90 minutes or however long the film is. It is so relentless, and I don't think they could have achieved that pace without it really nailing every little detail in advance.
And I think, therefore, the lesson we can take away is because of the storyboarding, which actually was kind of encouraged because Arnold Schwarzenegger had to delay taking part in the film. He was already booked to do something else, and the production team, James Cameron, Gail Ann Hurd, and the others, used that time to prep, and literally being on the day of the shoot, they could film exactly what they needed, as opposed to turning up on location and then deciding what they're going to do. And I wonder again whether there's a lesson in that for us to be more efficient as content marketers.
Yeah, I agree. This is a good. This is a really a good lesson in how to do that.
Do you know, when you talk about the pace, I mean, do you have, it's hard, but do you have any favourite moments or any favourite scenes in Terminator?
There's one scene where the Terminator's in his room, and I think he's already been damaged, so maybe half of his face has disappeared, and somebody knocks on the door. It might be a janitor or something, and you can see that all these potential responses come up on the screen, and the bottom one is F off, and it flashes, and then Schwarzenegger turns to the door and goes off, and I just love that bit. But I think funnily enough for me, it's when the android effectively becomes totally metal, so his skin's all gone and it's now just the metal part. That was, for me, the most exciting and most terrifying. So that was the bit that Arnold obviously wasn't in. That was really what got me.
When the music composer Brad Fiedel was asked to work on the project, now you must remember, all of us, that back then James Cameron was nobody.
Yeah,
I think you'd be the first one to say that, to save money. I think he and a few others slept in cars and on set, and sometime didn't have always permission to film, but just went on like proper guerrilla style, which is always quite exciting. And so Brad Fiedel, it confesses that it met quite a few up and coming, filmmakers, always full of obviously passion for their project. But when he said, when I watch it, it's pretty mediocre, and then I'm going to come up with the music. So he watched that, and he said embarrassingly James stayed. So I was like, oh, crap, I've got to watch the film with the filmmaker. What if I don't like it that much? I'm going to have to pretend. And he was saying that by the end of the movie, when the android gets up again, and it's almost like it's relentless. And Brad Fiedel says, he caught himself saying, I can't believe it. Will it ever die? And he was completely caught up in a story. And then he realized, oh no, now he's going to think, that I like the movie too much and that kind of thing. So there was some fascinating things. But for me, the one message that I took away from a marketing point of view is, once again, the disconnect between the creators and the distributors. So I think through the effort of Gail and Hurd again, they got the distribution or support from Orion Pictures. But they, the suits at Orion Pictures, didn't know what they had, and they were confused by the film. What was it? Action? Is it sci-fi? And this and the other. So what they did was to promote it to only a young male audience, thinking to them, really, here, if you want a bit more sci-fi, this is one for you. They only had one screening for the critics, and were looking to release it to only a small number of cinemas, which is crazy. And then the agents for both Michael Biehn, who plays Kyle Reese, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, realized that this was a vastly superior as a film, and they organized their own screenings without telling the distributors. The critics loved it, and more importantly, talking about getting the audience demographics wrong, so did a female audience and couples, because ultimately this is a love story between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese.
Absolutely right. And again, we keep coming back to this on the show, Pascal. You've got to know your audience, and they probably missed a trick because they didn't do enough test screenings, they didn't talk. If they'd have realised that this film was going to appeal to females and to couples, it could have been an even bigger initial box office success. So I think you need to test your audience. You always need to test your audience.
And how many times do we hear that story? And what was crazy is because Orion Pictures thought they had it right, they blew all their budget in targeting solely that young male audience.
Yeah.
And when they realized their mistake, they had no budget for marketing left.
That's
and
incredible.
Thank God for word of mouth. Thank God for the critics who wrote articles galore and interviews and so on. But you're right. There could have been even greater success had it done just that. And I think for me, it's back to this idea of spending just enough time on the audience and reflecting on them is so important.
And here's a really geeky thing. I know that you're not a massive Doctor Who fan.
I'm not.
But Doctor Who is one of my favourite all-time TV shows. And there was a Doctor Who story, first broadcast in 1972. So a decade before Terminator came out, and it was John Pertwee was played the Doctor, and the story was called Day of the Daleks, and the story started in the present day, so in 1972, and these people came back from the future in order to kill somebody in the present to prevent the future taking place. And in the future, the Daleks had invaded the Earth, and they came back in time to kill this politician that they felt was responsible for the way the future turned out. And the Daleks, of course, look like machines. And I've always wondered whether Cameron saw that story, Day of the Daleks, and effectively ripped off the storyline, because it is absolutely exactly the same idea. People from the future coming back in time to kill somebody in order to change the future that they live in. And it's actually worth it. If you've never seen that Doctor Who story, buy it on DVD. It's actually a really good story, and it's one that they've actually updated with visual effects and special effects from the present day to make it look less 70s. I've always wondered whether James Cameron had secretly been a Doctor Who fan and had seen that story and used it.
Well, someone like him, it must be so well read and so well, whatever the expression is, to watch, because he just loves the medium. Absolutely right. But it's fascinating, this idea of time travel and this idea of changing past and future has been around, it would seem, forever. I'm thinking right now, as I'm talking to you, Looper with Bruce Willis was actually very, very interesting. I've got one to watch, which I've not seen yet, called Predestination with Ethan Hawke, I think. Simple ones like Time Cop, with Jean-Claude Van Damme, there's always there where we seem, as a society, as a culture, we're intrigued by this idea of the butterfly effect.
Yeah, and there was a great. We're going to go off on a time travel tangent here, but back in the I think it was back in the 80s, there was a BBC one-off play which was called The Flip Side of Dominic Hyde, and again that was a real mind-blowingly complicated time travel conundrum. I'm going to have to go and see if I can find that now.
So, you're talking about knowing your audience. I think as storytellers, we also need to understand the craft of storytelling and know your hero. So we, in screenwriting and filmmaking kind of terms, a hero is the character who changes the most throughout the duration of the film. In this case, of course, is Sarah Connor, who changes the most and is the one that almost, saves Kyle Reese to begin with, and tries to anyway. And that to me was very, very important. And of course, she came back in T2, Terminator 2, which was this incredible. Oh, wow. I remember going to the movies in 1991 when it came out and left thinking, what have I just seen? Because you were right, T2 was just as relentless as the very first one.
Absolutely. I mean, if not more. And of course, they had the bigger budget to spend. And of course, the set pieces were even more impressive.
So in the first one, you have the love story between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese. In the second one is obviously between Sarah Connor and John Connor, And then God knows what they were thinking with Terminator 3, but I wanted to love it because I love the franchise, but I couldn't, Roger. It just didn't work for me at all.
Have they not sort of retconned that out of existence now? Because the last Terminator film that came out last year was effectively set after Terminator 2, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think
Dark Fate, and that was so much better. So much better. I'm actually okay with Terminator Salvation, with Kristen Bell. I think that's all right, and I was okay with the TV series. But you're right, that and what was it, Genesis? I thought that was just diabolical. When you think again, so my point to you is that those kind of clumsy effort makes the first one look even better when they had a fraction of the time and a fraction of the budget.
Yeah, I think it's something you see in Cameron's films, isn't it? Is the actual story is not quite what you expect it. Like, this is a love story. Even Titanic was a love story, wasn't it? Really, it was just that they were on the Titanic at the time, and I think it's again, look at the film and look at the story that's being told, and especially with Cameron, it's often just a little bit off what you think it might actually be.
Now, for that point, he's a very, very good storyteller, and is in line with the likes of Ridley Scott and many others. And the film has been so successful that it's done well back in 1985 with VHS. Then he had his DVD special edition, which I've got, then the Blu-ray, then the 4Ks and so on. And, they must feel so proud as filmmakers that, here we are, all those years later, still talking about it as a reference, as something that you can learn from.
And of course, we mentioned the Nintendo NES and the Sega Mega Drive before, and the Terminator Mega Drive game was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. It was a platform shooter, but I can remember spending hours playing that game.
So I'm going to leave you with, I suppose, a quote from James Cameron.
Okay.
So it was asked obviously about, was he surprised? And of course he was surprised. But he said, but in really, it was kind of a hit because we released it smartly between the summer blockbusters and the Christmas blockbusters. And his quote is as follows: because you see, it is better to be a big fish in a small pond than the other way around.
Yeah.
And that would be the
words.
last, film marketing tip, which is know your timing as well.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Well, Roger, thank you so much. So to our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for your support. This has been episode 15 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Please leave comments, reviews, and subscribe to all the usual places. He was Roger Edwards. I was Pascal Fintoni. Until next time, go out there, make sure your marketing is done right.
We'll be back.